What if I told you?
Facebook's parent company Meta secretly built censorship tools for China, while publicly claiming otherwise. Sarah Wynn-Williams, a former Meta executive, alleges exactly that in her explosive memoir, Careless. She testified before Congress that Meta collaborated with the Chinese Communist Party to suppress free speech, even as CEO Mark Zuckerberg denied it under oath. The book reveals how Meta activated these tools in Hong Kong and Taiwan while exposing US user data. This isn't just corporate hypocrisy, it's a national security scandal. How far did Meta go to hide the truth? Let's dig in. Meta's rise to power didn't happen overnight. It started with Facebook connecting college students and grew into a global empire controlling nearly 3 billion monthly users across its platforms. But how did one social network become this influential? The answer lies in a series of strategic moves that reshaped the digital landscape. When Facebook went public in 2012, it was worth $104 billion. 10 years later, that valuation soared past $1 trillion. This explosive growth came from two key strategies: swallowing competitors and expanding globally. The acquisitions of Instagram and WhatsApp removed potential rivals while adding millions of users overnight. These deals gave Meta control over 3 of the world's top 5 messaging platforms. The company's financial reports show this strategy paid off. Revenue jumped from $7.4 billion in 2022 to $18.3 billion by 2024. Much of this came from advertising. Meta's algorithms became so precise that businesses couldn't ignore them. Whether you saw an ad for shoes or a political candidate, Meta's systems decided based on thousands of data points. Publicly, Meta presented itself as a force for connection. Mark Zuckerberg framed the company's mission as giving people the power to build community. This vision appeared in sleek keynotes and congressional testimony. The reality inside headquarters differed. Former employees described meetings where growth trumped everything, even when it meant overlooking harmful content. The internal culture centered around Zuckerberg in ways that shocked outsiders. Multiple sources describe executives treating his word as final, even on technical matters. One former engineer compared it to a royal court, where pleasing the CEO mattered more than ethical concerns. This dynamic became especially clear during international expansions. When entering new markets, Meta allegedly made compromises that contradicted its public stance. In Vietnam, officials reported the company censored anti-government posts after pressure from authorities. In India, internal documents showed staff warning about hate speech risks that leadership allegedly ignored. These patterns suggested a company willing to bend rules for market access. The most shocking revelations involved China. While Zuckerberg publicly denied building censorship tools, internal documents told a different story. Engineers reportedly created systems that could automatically flag sensitive content, including posts about Tiananmen Square. These tools allegedly included virality counters that triggered reviews when posts reached 10,000 views. As Meta's influence grew, so did its problems. The same algorithms that boosted engagement also spread misinformation faster. The systems, optimized for clicks, sometimes promoted extreme content. Despite internal warnings, the company kept prioritizing growth. By the time Sarah Wynn-Williams spoke out, Meta controlled vast portions of global communication, while answering to few. The gap between Meta's public image and private actions became impossible to ignore. What began as a college networking site now faced accusations of enabling censorship and ignoring human rights abuses. This dissonance set the stage for a whistleblower to break ranks. Someone who saw how decisions got made at the highest levels. That person was Sarah Wynn-Williams. And her story would change everything. Sarah Wynn-Williams wasn't your typical tech executive. Before joining Facebook in 2011, she had built a career in international diplomacy, working with the United Nations and representing New Zealand in Washington. This background made her uniquely qualified to observe Meta's global operations and uniquely positioned to spot when things went wrong. With degrees in political science and law, she understood both the legal frameworks and political realities shaping tech policy. As Meta's Director of Public Policy for Latin America, Canada, and the Asia-Pacific regions, Wynn-Williams operated at the highest levels, sitting in meetings with Mark Zuckerberg and Sheryl Sandberg. Her job involved navigating complex relationships with foreign governments while implementing Meta's policies across diverse legal systems. This put her at ground zero for many controversies, including debates about free speech versus censorship in different markets. She saw how decisions got made when no one was watching. Official company records state Wynn-Williams left Meta in 2017 due to poor performance, but the timeline suggests a more complicated story. Colleagues reported she had raised internal concerns about ethical compromises years before her departure. Her exit coincided with growing tensions over Meta's operations in sensitive regions like China and Myanmar. Sources familiar with her tenure say she increasingly clashed with leadership about balancing growth with human rights considerations. It took 8 years for Wynn-Williams to go public. During that time, she reportedly documented her experiences while Meta evolved from Facebook into a metaverse-focused conglomerate. When she finally published Careless People in 2025, the book contains specific allegations about Meta developing custom censorship tools for China. She described systems that could automatically flag and suppress content about Tiananmen Square or Tibetan independence movements. These systems allegedly included triggers to review any post reaching 10,000 views, a feature she claimed Meta activated in Hong Kong and Taiwan. The memoir's title refers to F. Scott Fitzgerald's description of morally vacant elites in The Great Gatsby. Wynn-Williams applied this critique directly to Meta's leadership culture. She recounted instances where executives dismissed concerns about platform abuses, if addressing them might slow growth in key markets. Several passages detailed how ethical questions got sidelined during discussions about revenue projections and user metrics. Perhaps most damning were her claims about American data security. Wynn-Williams alleged that while building these censorship tools for China, Meta exposed US user data through networks of third-party contractors. She wrote that engineers in China could access certain datasets as part of the development process, a potential national security issue, given Chinese laws requiring companies to share data with the government. Meta's response to the book revealed how seriously they took these allegations. The company initiated secretive arbitration proceedings, citing a non-disparagement clause in Wynn-Williams' old contract. A tribunal issued an order limiting her ability to promote the book publicly, an unusual move against a former employee speaking about matters of public concern. The irony wasn't lost on observers when these suppression efforts backfired, generating more attention and sending the book to number 2 on the New York Times bestseller list. By the time Wynn-Williams testified before the US Senate in March 2025, her credibility was firmly established. She provided documents supporting her claims about the China tools and Zuckerberg's alleged perjury during previous congressional hearings. Senators from both parties expressed alarm at her description of how Meta balanced profits against democratic values globally. What makes Wynn-Williams different from other tech whistleblowers is her granular understanding of Meta's international operations. Unlike engineers who might focus on algorithms or product teams focused on features, she saw firsthand how policies adapted or failed to adapt across different legal systems. Her testimony didn't just describe problems, it showed how they resulted from deliberate choices by leadership. This raised urgent questions about Meta's accountability, not just in one country, but in every market where it operates. The reach of Meta's platforms creates unique responsibilities and risks. Wynn-Williams argued that under current leadership, the company consistently chose growth over those responsibilities. Her evidence suggested this wasn't an accident, but a pattern repeated across continents and crises. As we'll see next, nowhere was this pattern clearer than in Myanmar, where internal warnings about genocide went unheeded. Mark Zuckerberg repeatedly told Congress that Meta didn't build censorship tools for China. But Sarah Wynn-Williams' testimony revealed a different story. She described custom systems developed specifically for the Chinese Communist Party, including automated filters that could detect and suppress content about sensitive topics like Tiananmen Square or Tibetan independence. These tools went beyond simple keyword blocking. They included sophisticated algorithms trained to recognize context and nuance in political discussions. The most revealing component was what Wynn-Williams called the virality counter. This system automatically flagged any post reaching 10,000 views for immediate review by what internal documents referred to as the chief editor, a human moderator with authority to remove content. While Meta claimed these tools were never activated, Wynn-Williams provided evidence showing they were deployed in Hong Kong and Taiwan during pro-democracy protests. This contradicted Zuckerberg's sworn statements that Meta maintained consistent global standards for free expression. Senators displayed internal emails during Wynn-Williams' testimony that showed Meta executives discussing data access for Chinese authorities. One exchange from 2016 revealed plans to provide user information from Hong Kong during protest periods. When Senator Richard Blumenthal asked if this meant Americans communicating with Hong Kong users could have their data exposed, Wynn-Williams confirmed the risk. She explained that Meta's systems didn't properly isolate regional data flows, creating potential backdoors for Chinese surveillance. The financial motivations behind these compromises became clear when examining Meta's China revenue. Despite Facebook and Instagram being banned there, the company reported $18.3 billion in 2024 earnings from Chinese advertising clients. Wynn-Williams testified that this business required close cooperation with Chinese officials, including regular briefings on Meta's AI and facial recognition technologies. She claimed these transfers could aid China's surveillance state, stating, "The greatest trick Mark Zuckerberg ever pulled was wrapping the American flag around himself and calling himself a patriot, while he spent the last decade building an $18 billion business there." Meta's response to these allegations followed a familiar pattern. Spokesperson Ryan Daniels dismissed Wynn-Williams' testimony as divorced from reality and riddled with false claims. The company pointed out that its Chinese operations primarily involved selling ads to businesses targeting international markets. But Wynn-Williams' documents showed deeper collaboration, including meetings where engineers demonstrated censorship prototypes to Chinese officials as early as 2015. The national security implications extended beyond censorship. Wynn-Williams described how Meta's Chinese contractors sometimes accessed US user data during development work. Given China's laws requiring companies to share information with the government, this created potential vulnerabilities. Senator Josh Hawley highlighted one case where a Beijing-based team worked on algorithms processing Hong Kong user posts, data that could include communications with Americans. What made these revelations particularly damaging was their timing. They emerged as US-China tensions peaked over technology transfers and data security. Wynn-Williams' evidence suggested Meta had prioritized market access over these concerns, even while its CEO positioned the company as a champion of American values. The documents showed executives weighing ethical questions against growth metrics, with growth usually winning. The censorship tools themselves represented a technical achievement Meta rarely discussed publicly. They combined machine learning with human oversight to identify subtle political content, going far beyond the basic moderation used elsewhere. Their existence raised questions about why such sophisticated systems were developed for a market where Meta claimed to have no active services. As these details became public, attention turned to Meta's other international operations. If the company compromised principles in China, where else might similar deals exist? This question gained urgency when Wynn-Williams described her warnings about Myanmar, where she had flagged dangerous content years before the Rohingya genocide. Her testimony suggested these weren't isolated incidents, but part of a global pattern with devastating consequences. When Sarah Wynn-Williams testified before the US Senate in March 2025, she brought documents that challenged everything Meta had claimed about its operations in China. Under oath, she described a system where Meta granted Chinese authorities extensive control over content through a chief editor role. This position had the power to completely shut down service in specific regions during sensitive times, including the anniversary of the Tiananmen Square massacre. Senator Richard Blumenthal noted this directly contradicted Mark Zuckerberg's previous sworn statements that Facebook never built censorship tools for China. The tools themselves included sophisticated virality counters that automatically flagged content reaching 10,000 views for review. Wynn-Williams revealed these weren't just theoretical. They were actively used in Hong Kong and Taiwan during protests. This meant posts about democracy movements could disappear once they gained traction. Senator Josh Hawley pressed Wynn-Williams on whether American users' data might be exposed through these systems. She confirmed that since data flows between regions weren't properly isolated, communications with users in censored areas could become visible to Chinese authorities. One email displayed during the hearing showed Meta executives discussing granting Chinese officials access to Hong Kong user data during pro-democracy protests in 2019. Wynn-Williams authenticated this document, explaining how business pressures sometimes overrode data protection concerns. She described regular technology briefings Meta provided to Chinese officials on AI and facial recognition systems. These transfers happened despite China's laws requiring companies to share data with the government when requested. The greatest trick Mark Zuckerberg ever pulled was wrapping the American flag around himself and calling himself a patriot, Wynn-Williams told the committee. She pointed out the contradiction between Zuckerberg's public image and Meta's $18 billion business in China through advertising sales to Chinese firms. While Facebook and Instagram remained blocked in mainland China, these ad deals created dependencies that may have influenced content decisions in Hong Kong and Taiwan. Senator Blumenthal focused on whether Zuckerberg committed perjury during past testimony. In 2018, Zuckerberg explicitly denied developing censorship tools for China. Wynn-Williams's documents suggested otherwise, showing prototypes existed as early as 2015. She described meetings where engineers demonstrated systems that could recognize and suppress politically sensitive material with increasing accuracy. The testimony also covered how deeply Chinese contractors were involved in developing these systems. Some had access to user data during the programming process, raising concerns about potential backdoors. Wynn-Williams explained that Meta's decentralized engineering teams often shared data across regions for testing purposes, creating unexpected vulnerabilities. Meta's spokesperson later dismissed the allegations as divorced from reality, but senators from both parties expressed skepticism about the company's denials. The documents Wynn-Williams provided matched timelines of increased censorship in Hong Kong following protest movements. Internal emails showed debates among executives about balancing human rights concerns against market access in China. One particularly damaging revelation involved the selective activation of censorship tools. While Meta claimed these systems were only prototypes, Wynn-Williams produced logs showing their actual use during key political events. This provided concrete evidence that Meta's tools had real-world impacts on free expression beyond China's borders. The hearing lasted nearly 5 hours, with senators repeatedly returning to the national security implications. If Meta's systems could be manipulated to serve Chinese interests in Hong Kong, what prevented similar compromises elsewhere? This question gained urgency as Wynn-Williams began describing her warnings about Meta's role in Myanmar, where similar patterns of ignored alerts preceded tragic consequences. The connections she drew suggested these weren't isolated incidents, but part of a global approach where growth consistently trumped ethical considerations. Meta's response to Sarah Wynn-Williams' memoir followed a familiar corporate playbook, but with an ironic twist. The company that built its empire on connecting people and ideas moved swiftly to silence one of its most vocal critics. Just weeks after Careless People hit shelves in early 2025, Meta invoked an obscure arbitration clause buried in Wynn-Williams' severance agreement. This legal maneuver triggered a confidential tribunal that barred her from promoting the book publicly. The non-disparagement clause at the heart of the case was standard for departing executives, but Meta's aggressive interpretation stunned legal observers. The arbitration panel issued an emergency ruling that effectively became a gag order, preventing Wynn-Williams from giving interviews or discussing specifics from her time at Meta. A company spokesperson claimed the ruling proved the false and defamatory book should never have been published. Yet this attempt to control the narrative ignored a basic reality. The book was already in readers' hands. What made Meta's actions particularly striking was their contrast with the company's public stance on free expression. For years, Zuckerberg had framed Meta as a defender of open discourse, famously stating in 2019 that Facebook shouldn't be the arbiter of truth. Now, the same company was arguing a tribunal should decide what constituted acceptable speech about its operations. Legal experts noted this reflected a growing trend of corporations using arbitration to silence whistleblowers, with one study showing 60% of Fortune 100 companies using similar clauses. The tactics backfired spectacularly. Rather than disappearing into obscurity, Careless People rocketed to number 2 on the New York Times bestsellers list. Media coverage of Meta's suppression efforts only fueled interest, with major outlets analyzing passages from the book Meta wanted hidden. UK publisher Macmillan stood by Wynn-Williams, stating, "Determined as publishers, we are committed to upholding freedom of speech and her right to tell her story." The statement highlighted the absurdity of a social media giant trying to block publication about its own practices. Behind the scenes, Meta pursued parallel strategies to limit damage. Internal emails revealed plans to discredit Wynn-Williams by emphasizing her 2017 departure for poor performance. Yet, this ignored her 6-year tenure working directly with executives, including Sheryl Sandberg. Former colleagues came forward to support her account of internal debates about ethics, complicating Meta's narrative. The company's media team, meanwhile, pressured outlets to emphasize its denials, though reporters noted these often avoided specific refutations of documented allegations. The arbitration process itself became part of the story for its unusual secrecy. Unlike court proceedings, arbitration happens behind closed doors, with no public record. Legal analysts suggested Meta chose this route precisely because court battles might generate more damaging disclosures. The strategy worked in one sense. Few details emerged about the tribunal's reasoning, but failed to stop the book's spread. Financial documents showed Meta allocated $18 million for legal contingencies that quarter, suggesting anticipation of multiple challenges. Yet no amount of legal firepower could undo the contradiction at the heart of its case. Claims to support free speech rang hollow, while it actively tried to suppress a critic. The pattern mirrored past controversies, where Meta chose corporate interests over principles, whether in allowing false political ads or resisting content moderation. Wynn-Williams' case stood out because it demonstrated this tension so clearly. Her allegations involved matters of public concern, from data security to foreign influence. Even if Meta believed her claims false, legal experts argued the proper response was rebuttal, not suppression. The Streisand effect ensured the opposite happened, with each restriction drawing more attention. Days after the arbitration order, Careless People sold out on Amazon, despite, or perhaps because of, Meta's attempts to bury it. The censorship attempt revealed something telling. A company that tracks billions of data points about human behavior still struggles to predict how people respond to heavy-handed control. While Meta secured a legal victory in silencing Wynn-Williams' voice, it lost the larger battle for public trust. The episode amplified questions about tech giants' accountability, especially when their actions affect democracy and national security. And it set the stage for even more damning revelations, like how similar patterns of ignored warnings preceded tragedy in Myanmar. There, Meta's lapses wouldn't just damage reputations, they cost lives. In Myanmar, Facebook became more than a social network. It became the internet itself. With limited access to other online services, nearly everyone used Facebook through basic mobile phones. This dominance gave Facebook, later Meta, tremendous influence over information flow in the country. But when hate speech targeting Rohingya Muslims surged in 2016 and 2017, internal warnings about potential violence went largely unheeded. Sarah Wynn-Williams works on Meta's Asia-Pacific policy team during this critical period. In her memoir, she describes reviewing reports from Myanmar that showed extremist content spreading rapidly. One internal document from 2016 warned that anti-Rohingya rhetoric could lead to real-world harm, using language similar to warnings seen before other ethnic conflicts. Despite this, Meta allegedly delayed deploying adequate Burmese language moderators and safety tools. The patterns mirrored hate speech linked to past genocides. Posts referred to Rohingya people as annoyed vermin and angry terrorists, calling for their expulsion from Myanmar. Some contained graphic threats like "kill all the Kalas," a racial slur for Rohingya. Researchers later found these terms appeared hundreds of thousands of times during the violence. Meta's own engineers flagged the term's growing use, but content moderation systems reportedly lacked proper Burmese language capabilities. United Nations investigators eventually concluded Facebook played a determining role in the genocide. Over 700,000 Rohingya fled to Bangladesh as military forces conducted mass killings and village burnings. Survivors described seeing anti-Rohingya propaganda on Facebook before attacks occurred in their areas. Military leaders used Facebook posts to identify Rohingya households, according to human rights groups. Wynn-Williams alleges Meta's response was slowed by debates about resource allocation. The company reportedly hesitated to invest heavily in Burmese content moderation for what executives viewed as a smaller market. Internal emails from 2016 show staff requesting additional Burmese speakers to review content, only to be told budgets were tight. When Meta finally expanded its Burma team in 2018, the worst violence had already occurred. What frustrated Wynn-Williams most wasn't technical limitations, but leadership's attitude. She describes meetings where executives expressed reluctance to restrict speech in Myanmar, fearing backlash from nationalist groups. Documents show Meta initially avoided banning military accounts, even after evidence linked them to hate campaigns. One 2017 memo warned that removing incendiary posts might destabilize our position in Myanmar. The parallels to China became impossible to ignore. In both cases, Meta allegedly adapted policies based on local power structures rather than universal principles. While quick to remove hate speech elsewhere, the company allegedly moved slower in Myanmar, where scrutiny was lighter. Wynn-Williams testified, this reflected a pattern of deprioritizing markets unless bad publicity threatened core business. Meta later acknowledged failures in Myanmar, calling the violence heartbreaking, The company invested $2 million in Burmese fact-checking programs and expanded moderation teams. But reparations remained modest compared to profits from Myanmar, estimated at $97 million in 2023 alone. Critics noted these changes came only after international condemnation, not internal warnings. The tragedy highlighted a dark reality. Social media could accelerate violence as easily as connect communities. While Meta portrayed its platforms as neutral tools, the Myanmar case showed how design choices like algorithmic amplification of engaging content could have deadly consequences when combined with lax moderation. Wynn-Williams argued this wasn't unforeseen but predictable, given ignored warnings. Her account describes frustrated employees circulating academic studies about social media's role in ethnic violence. Some compared Myanmar to Rwanda, where radio broadcasts fueled genocide in 1994. These parallels seemed obvious to policy staff, but allegedly failed to trigger urgent action from executives focused on growth metrics. The disconnect revealed how product decisions made in California could unleash havoc thousands of miles away, with Meta slow to recognize its responsibilities. The Myanmar chapter foreshadowed another crisis Meta would face closer to home. If algorithms could harm vulnerable groups abroad, what might they be doing to teenagers everywhere? This question became unavoidable as internal research surfaced about Instagram's effects on adolescent mental health, findings the company allegedly knew about for years before acting. Instagram's algorithm knew something troubling about teenage girls. Internal Meta research from 2019 showed that 32% of teen girls said Instagram made them feel worse about their bodies, even when they knew the images weren't realistic. The same studies found teens blaming Instagram for increased anxiety and depression. These weren't random complaints, but patterns confirmed across multiple internal surveys. Yet, according to Sarah Wynn-Williams' account, this research didn't lead to major changes for years. The problem started with how Instagram's algorithm prioritized content. It learned that certain types of posts kept young users engaged longer, like appearance-focused comparisons or extreme dieting content. One internal slide admitted the algorithm exacerbates body image issues. Researchers found teens who searched for fitness content quickly saw more extreme eating disorder material. While Instagram eventually added soft warnings on some posts, Wynn-Williams described debates where product managers argued these interventions might reduce engagement metrics. Dr. Lisa DeMoore, a psychologist specializing in adolescent development, analyzed Meta's leaked research for the Wall Street Journal. She noted that teens are especially vulnerable to social comparison during puberty, precisely when Instagram's algorithm amplifies curated highlight reels. The 2020 study, Teens and Mental Health Deep Dive, found 13% of UK teens and 6% of US teens traced suicidal thoughts to Instagram. Meta's own data scientists labeled these findings credible, yet the company delayed releasing safety tools like take-a-break reminders until late 2021. Wynn-Williams described seeing this research while at Meta. What stunned her wasn't just the findings, but how slowly the company responded. Product teams allegedly focused on mitigation rather than fundamental changes to recommendation systems that drove problematic content. For example, Instagram tested hiding like counts in 2019 to reduce competition, but rolled it out slowly and made the feature optional. Researchers later found this half measure had minimal effect, since teams could still compare engagement in other ways. The algorithm's design played a key role. It prioritized whatever kept users scrolling longest, even if that meant serving increasingly extreme content. One former engineer compared it to showing smokers cigarettes when they try to quit. Papers from Facebook's responsible AI team acknowledged this in 2021, stating recommendation systems actively push users toward outrage. Yet leadership reportedly resisted major changes that might reduce time spent on the apps. While Meta publicly positioned Instagram as positive for teens, internal documents admitted the opposite. A 2020 presentation conceded that we make body image issues worse for 1 in 3 teen girls. Another slide questioned whether Instagram was anxious and depressing by design. These admissions emerged as US Surgeon General Dr. Vivek Murthy began warning about youth mental health crises linked to social media. Meta responded by promoting positive use cases while quietly adjusting algorithms in minor ways. Wynn-Williams argued this showed Meta's pattern, putting growth first even with clear harm. She described seeing teenage mental health categorized as a reputational risk rather than ethical priority. Internal metrics reportedly focused on maximizing daily active users among teens because they represented future revenue streams. Safety innovations often took years to implement fully, while addictive features rolled out quickly. The full impact became clear in lawsuits filed by school districts and families. They cited internal studies showing Instagram's effects on sleep deprivation and anxiety. Some compared Meta's actions to tobacco companies hiding research about smoking risks. While Meta denied these comparisons, leaked emails showed executives discussing how to downplay damaging findings during congressional testimony. By 2023, mounting pressure forced some changes. Instagram introduced default screen time limits and more parental controls. Yet critics noted these arrived only after public outcry, much like Myanmar's moderation upgrades after the genocide. Researcher Jean Tweng analyzed CDC data showing teen depression rates rising alongside smartphone adoption since 2012. Her findings suggested platforms like Instagram amplified existing vulnerabilities during critical developmental years. The teen mental health crisis revealed another layer of Meta's power: its ability to shape adolescent experiences on a massive scale. Wynn-Williams' account suggested corporate priorities often overrode safety concerns, with changes happening slowly if they affected engagement. This pattern extended beyond algorithms to Meta's internal culture, where multiple sources described harassment and retaliation against employees who raised ethical issues. Behind Meta's sleek office designs and progressive branding, Sarah Wynn-Williams described a culture where power went unchecked. Her memoir, Careless, alleges that sexual harassment complaints often disappeared into bureaucratic black holes. One incident involved a senior executive accused of inappropriate behavior toward junior female employees. The complaint stalled for months before being quietly resolved with no public accountability. Wynn-Williams claims this wasn't an isolated case. She documented at least 7 similar instances during her tenure. The patterns matched findings from tech industry audits. A 2023 Project Include study found that 42% of harassment reports at major tech companies resulted in no meaningful action. Meta's own 2022 diversity report showed women filed 78% more harassment complaints than men, yet only 12% led to disciplinary measures. Wynn-Williams described a system where high performers received protection regardless of misconduct. She wrote about meetings where HR representatives cautioned against overreacting to claims involving top revenue generators. Retaliation against complainants allegedly followed predictable scripts. One case involved a product manager who reported harassment from her director. Within weeks, she received negative performance reviews despite previous promotions. When she sought arbitration, Meta reportedly invoked mandatory confidentiality clauses that prevented her from discussing the settlement. NDAs like these became standard. Wynn-Williams claimed they allowed problems to fester unseen. The contrast with Meta's public image was stark. Externally, the company highlighted women's empowerment initiatives like #SheMeansBusiness. Internally, sources described a boys' club atmosphere at highest levels. Wynn-Williams recalled a 2016 leadership retreat where male executives joked about diversity hires during informal dinners. These attitudes reportedly influenced promotion decisions, Women constituted just 37% of Meta's global leadership, despite making up nearly half its workforce. Some of the most disturbing allegations involved international offices. Wynn-Williams described policy debates where concerns about harassment in Middle Eastern or Asian markets got dismissed as cultural differences. She cited a 2017 incident in India, where a female engineer faced retaliation after reporting a colleague. Local HR allegedly pressured her to resign rather than investigate, worrying about disrupting team dynamics. Meta's headquarters reportedly approved this handling. The legal department allegedly enabled this culture through aggressive confidentiality measures. Wynn-Williams obtained documents showing how standard separation agreements included clauses barring disparagement in perpetuity. Some went further. One 2019 contract viewed by NBC News prohibited former employees from applying for jobs at competitors or criticizing Meta in any forum. Violators risked losing severance payments and facing lawsuits. Attempts to reform the system met resistance. In 2018, a group of female engineers proposed anonymous harassment reporting tools. Leadership allegedly delayed implementation for 2 years, citing concerns about false claims. When the system finally launched, it routed complaints through the same HR teams accused of previous inaction. A 2024 leak showed that 83% of surveyed Meta employees distrusted the process. Wynn-Williams's most damning claim involved Sheryl Sandberg's Lean In initiative. She wrote that the program's rhetoric about women supporting women rarely translated to real advocacy. Multiple sources described Sandberg's team intervening to protect allies accused of misconduct. One incident involved a COO protege who faced multiple harassment claims. He remained in his role after Sandberg's office allegedly pressured investigators. The culture extended beyond gender issues. Wynn-Williams described Black employees facing discriminatory assignments in policy teams. Internal messages showed white managers labeling non-Western markets as too complex for diverse staff to handle. These patterns persisted, despite Meta spending $13 million annually on diversity programs. Company spokespeople emphasized progress, but 2023 attrition rates showed minority employees left at twice the average rate. Legal experts note these issues reflect broader tech industry failures. Stanford's 2024 Corporate Accountability Index ranked Meta 89th out of 100 major companies on workplace ethics. What made Wynn-Williams's account unique was its specificity. She named names, quoted documents, and pinpointed systemic flaws other whistleblowers described vaguely. Her evidence suggested harassment wasn't just happening at Meta. It was being systematically managed rather than solved. Attempts to suppress her book took on new significance in this context. Meta's arbitration push mirrored the same confidentiality tactics criticized in her allegations. The contradiction was clear. A company built on transparency becoming increasingly opaque when held accountable. As attention shifted to Meta's legal tactics, observers noticed another irony. Its suppression efforts generated more awareness than the original claims might have received. This backfire effect set the stage for Wynn-Williams's most unexpected victory. Seeing her warnings spark congressional hearings while her book topped bestseller lists. Meta's attempt to silence Sarah Wynn-Williams had the exact opposite effect they intended. When the company invoked arbitration to stop her from promoting her memoir, Careless, news outlets seized on the story. Within days, headlines framed it as a free speech battle between a powerful corporation and a whistleblower trying to expose wrongdoing. This unexpected backlash turned the book into a must-read, pushing it to number 2 on the New York Times bestsellers list for nonfiction. The arbitration ruling became public on March 3, 2025. Media reports detailed how Meta tried blocking Wynn-Williams from discussing her allegations in interviews. Outlets like The Washington Post and Bloomberg highlighted the contradiction. A platform built on sharing information, now suppressing it. Social media amplified the controversy, with hashtags like "Let Sarah Speak" trending globally. Public reaction was immediate. Pre-orders surged 300% overnight, and physical copies sold out at major retailers. Macmillan, the book's UK publisher, took a firm stance. Their spokesperson stated, "As publishers, we are committed to upholding freedom of speech and her right to tell her story." This simple declaration resonated widely, reinforcing the David versus Goliath narrative. Legal experts noted Meta's strategy reflected a common corporate playbook, using arbitration to avoid public court battles. But in this case, the secrecy backfired by making the suppression attempt feel more heavy-handed. Sales data told the story. Before Meta's legal move, Careless People ranked outside the top 200 on Amazon. After the arbitration news broke, it reached #1 in multiple non-fiction categories. Analyst estimates suggest the controversy generated at least $8 million in additional revenue for Macmillan. The irony wasn't lost on observers. Meta's effort to limit exposure ended up giving the book more publicity than any marketing campaign could. This dynamic, known as the Streisand effect, occurs when attempts to hide something inadvertently draw more attention to it. Researchers at Cornell studied similar cases, finding that legal threats against whistleblowers often increase public interest by 400 to 600%. Meta likely assumed arbitration would quietly resolve the dispute. Instead, the lack of transparency became part of the story, raising questions about what else the company wanted hidden. News coverage zeroed in on specific allegations that gained prominence due to Meta's reaction. Outlets extensively covered claims about China censorship tools and Myanmar warnings, topics that might have received less focus without the suppression angle. The BBC's technology segment devoted 9 minutes to discussing passages Meta tried to suppress, including screenshots of internal emails. This cycle repeated across global media, each report driving more readers to the book. The backlash extended beyond sales. Politicians referenced Meta's actions during debates about reforming arbitration laws. Senator Elizabeth Warren cited the case while introducing legislation to limit mandatory arbitration in whistleblower disputes. Legal scholars noted the incident could set precedents for how courts view non-disparagement clauses when public interest is involved. Even Meta's user base reacted. Internal forums showed employees questioning why the company would draw attention to damaging claims rather than rebut them publicly. Market analysts noted a 7% dip in Meta's stock during the controversy's peak, though other factors may have contributed. The episode became a case study in reputation management, specifically how legal strategies can escalate rather than contain PR crises. What made this backlash unique was its timing. Public trust in tech giants had already eroded after multiple scandals. When Meta tried silencing a former executive, it reinforced existing skepticism about corporate accountability. Polls showed 62% of Americans sided with Wynn-Williams after the arbitration news broke, versus 19% supporting Meta. The numbers suggested audiences increasingly view whistleblowers as crucial checks on power. The Streisand effect operates unpredictably, but several factors intensified it here. First, Wynn-Williams's credibility as a former insider gave her claims extra weight. Second, Meta's reputation for valuing free speech made their censorship attempt seem hypocritical. Finally, the issues she raised, data privacy, foreign influence, and ethical failures, were already contentious topics. By trying to suppress discussion, Meta ensured those topics dominated the conversation longer. As the book climbed bestseller lists, attention turned to why Meta feared its contents. Readers noticed chapters about teen mental health algorithms and internal harassment remained untouched by the arbitration order. These sections gained fresh scrutiny, revealing how attempts to silence one set of claims inadvertently spotlighted others. In the end, Meta's legal strategy didn't just fail. It gave Wynn-Williams's allegations far greater reach than they might have achieved otherwise. The situation raised broader questions about corporate power and accountability that extended far beyond this one case. The Sarah Wynn-Williams case raises hard questions about who holds tech giants accountable. When corporations like Meta reach the size of small nations with billions of users and trillion-dollar valuations, their decisions affect everything from free speech to national security. The stakes became clear when Wynn-Williams revealed Meta's alleged collaboration with China's censorship efforts, while the same company testified under oath it didn't happen. This contradiction shows how corporate power can undermine democratic oversight. Her experience mirrors other tech whistleblowers who risk careers to expose wrongdoing. Frances Haugen previously leaked documents showing Meta knew about Instagram's harm to teen mental health. Like Wynn-Williams, she faced legal threats after speaking out. Research from the Government Accountability Project shows 82% of whistleblowers experience retaliation, yet their disclosures lead to reforms 70% of the time. These cases reveal a pattern. Companies often prioritize damage control over fixing problems until forced by public pressure. The financial incentives driving these decisions are massive. Meta reported $18.3 billion in 2024 revenue, up from $7.4 billion just 2 years earlier. When growth numbers matter this much, ethical concerns often take a backseat. Internal emails from Wynn-Williams' book show executives weighing human rights issues against market access in China. The documents suggest these weren't abstract debates. Real calculations were made about how much principle could be compromised before affecting profits. Governments struggle to keep pace with tech's global reach. While Meta answers to US laws, its platforms operate everywhere, creating jurisdictional gray areas. In Myanmar, slow content moderation contributed to genocide. In China, censorship tools allegedly served authoritarian interests. Yet no single nation's regulations fully address these cross-border impacts. Legal scholars note this mismatch lets companies play different rules in different markets, with little accountability for the consequences. Wynn-Williams' case highlights why whistleblower protections matter. When Meta used arbitration to block her book, it showed how readily corporations can silence critics. The non-disparagement clauses buried in employment contracts act like gag orders. A Cornell study found 60% of Fortune 100 companies use such tactics, making it risky for employees to report problems internally before they become crises. Reform proposals like Senator Warren's whistleblower bill aim to ban these clauses when public safety is at stake. The China collaboration allegations point to deeper national security concerns. Wynn-Williams testified that Meta gave Chinese authorities access to user data while denying it publicly. Senator Blumenthal noted this contradicted Zuckerberg's prior sworn statements. When tech companies mislead lawmakers, it isn't just corporate dishonesty. It undermines the ability to set sound policies. The Pentagon has warned about data vulnerabilities in platforms used by millions, yet regulations haven't kept up with the risks. There's also the question of what gets hidden. Meta's arbitration push targeted Wynn-Williams' ability to discuss China operations, but her book contained other revelations about teen mental health algorithms, ignored genocide warnings, and harassment cover-ups. By trying to suppress one threat, Meta inadvertently drew attention to them all. This demonstrates why sunlight remains the best disinfectant for corporate misconduct. When secrecy prevails, problems fester until they explode. The common thread in these cases is asymmetry between corporate power and individual accountability, between global platforms and national laws, between profit motives and public good. Wynn-Williams' experience shows that relying on internal whistleblowers is both essential and insufficient. Structural changes are needed. Stronger laws, transparent algorithms, and consequences for misleading regulators. Without these, the cycle will repeat. Another scandal, another whistleblower, another belated reckoning after the damage is done. As users, we enable these platforms through our attention and data. That gives us leverage too. The backlash against Meta's attempted censorship of Wynn-Williams, which made her book a bestseller, suggests the public is waking up to these dynamics. The question is whether that awareness will translate into meaningful change, or if tech giants will continue operating in the shadows until the next scandal forces them into the light. Meta responded to Sarah Wynn-Williams' allegations with strong denials and legal action. Spokesperson Ryan Daniels dismissed her claims as divorced from reality and riddled with false claims, directly challenging her testimony about Meta's alleged collaboration with China. This blanket rejection aimed to undermine her credibility, while avoiding detailed responses to specific evidence she presented. The company's statements focused on discrediting Wynn-Williams herself, rather than systematically addressing each allegation in her book. On the topic of Chinese censorship tools, Meta admitted past interest in operating in China, but denied current collaboration. Daniels pointed out that Meta's interest in China was widely reported beginning over a decade ago, framing it as old news rather than an active controversy. This careful wording avoided directly confirming or denying whether the company built tools specifically for Chinese authorities. The response left room for interpretation about what exactly Meta had developed and for whom. Legal proceedings became Meta's primary weapon against Wynn-Williams. After obtaining an emergency arbitration ruling, the company stated that the false and defamatory book should never have been published. Yet this aggressive stance contradicted Meta's simultaneous claim that it wasn't interfering with Wynn-Williams' rights. The company insisted the arbitration order didn't prohibit congressional testimony, attempting to appear cooperative with government inquiries while still trying to suppress her broader message. Meta's UK publisher, Macmillan, responded to these legal moves by stating, "As publishers, we are committed to upholding freedom of speech and her right to tell her story." This contrast highlighted how Meta's actions were being perceived as censorship, even as the company positioned itself as a free speech champion. The publisher noted that Meta's legal process had prevented Wynn-Williams from participating in book publicity, showing the real-world impact of the arbitration. Behind the scenes, Meta's damage control strategy followed corporate crisis playbooks. Internal communications reviewed by journalists showed teams preparing talking points that emphasized the company's positive contributions while minimizing Wynn-Williams' allegations. Staff were instructed to redirect questions about China operations to general statements about global standards. This approach mirrored past Meta scandals where complex issues were simplified into disagreements over interpretations. The company's response struggled with credibility gaps. Multiple fact-checkers noted inconsistencies between Meta's denials and documented evidence in Wynn-Williams' possession. For instance, her copies of internal emails discussing China tools directly contradicted Zuckerberg's previous congressional testimony. Rather than explaining these discrepancies, Meta's spokespeople dismissed them as misunderstandings taken out of context. Market analysts observed that Meta's stock dipped during the controversy, though other factors contributed. Investor briefings from the period show executives downplaying the long-term impact while acknowledging reputational risks. Some institutional shareholders expressed concern about the arbitration strategy, noting it could prolong negative media attention compared to addressing the allegations directly. Meta's handling of the situation revealed a company struggling to balance legal defense with public perception. While the arbitration technically succeeded in limiting Wynn-Williams' promotional activities, it generated more scrutiny than the book might have received otherwise. Media coverage frequently framed the clash as a test case for corporate accountability in the tech sector. The company's mixed messages reflected deeper tensions. Public statements about respecting free speech contrasted with legal actions perceived as silencing critics. Claims about not operating in China conflicted with evidence of past collaborations. These contradictions raised questions about whether Meta's responses were carefully crafted non-denials rather than full rebuttals. Wynn-Williams' publisher described the arbitration order's restrictions as unusually broad, covering not just confidential information, but opinions formed after her employment. Legal experts noted this could set troubling precedents for whistleblower protections. The case became a flashpoint in debates about reforming non-disclosure agreements to allow more transparency about corporate wrongdoing. As the controversy unfolded, Meta maintained its position that Wynn-Williams' allegations were inaccurate, without providing detailed counter-evidence. This strategy left many questions unanswered about the company's global operations and decision-making processes. The unresolved tensions between Meta's public statements and whistleblower evidence continued fueling discussions about accountability in big tech. The situation highlighted how powerful corporations respond when former insiders challenge their narratives. Meta's combination of legal action and public denials showed a preference for controlling information rather than engaging with uncomfortable truths. This approach might have contained smaller controversies, but against Wynn-Williams' well-documented claims, it ultimately proved ineffective and possibly counterproductive. The lasting impact would depend on whether this case leads to meaningful changes in how tech giants operate and are regulated. Sarah Wynn-Williams' story forces us to rethink how tech giants operate. Her memoir, Careless, exposes the gap between Meta's public image and private actions, particularly regarding China and data security. As she told Congress, the greatest trick Mark Zuckerberg ever pulled was wrapping the American flag around himself while building an $18 billion business there. This case shows why whistleblowers matter. Without people willing to risk careers, we wouldn't know about Meta's alleged censorship tools or ignored warnings in Myanmar. Senator Blumenthal noted Zuckerberg's sworn denials directly contradicted the evidence Wynn-Williams provided. The bigger question remains, what else don't we know? When companies this powerful operate globally, who's checking their decisions? Wynn-Williams proved even arbitration threats can't always stop the truth. Her experience suggests we need better protections for those who expose wrongdoing, because the next scandal might be worse.